Europe is not for the faint of heart. From the crumbling ruins of the Western Roman Empire, a new civilization was born. As it grew in power and influence, it was shaped by a series of distinct characteristics that continue to define it today. Welcome to Medieval Europe, Part 1, The Middle Ages. It's me, and through this series, we've explored how societies form, grow, interact, and change throughout history. Now we turn our attention to medieval Europe. So if you're ready to learn about medieval Europe, join me. It's going to be fun. The year is 476 CE, and the last Western Roman emperor has just been deposed. But hold on a second. There are people living here, right? What happens now? For the next few centuries, Europe will be home to several Germanic kingdoms with their roots in the earlier Germanic peoples. Within a century of Rome's fall, these included the Burgundian, Frankish, Visigothic and Ostrogothic kingdoms. They were joined by others such as the Angles, Saxons and Jutes, who took over much of Britain after the departure of the Romans. In the north lived the Lombard, and the Byzantine Empire controlled territories in the south. A few years later, the Huns swept into Central Europe and established a powerful kingdom there. At the same time, Slavic kingdoms began appearing further east. In general, these various kingdoms were made up of small groups of people who shared common languages, customs and values, and they constantly battled each other for territory. Despite their differences, however, these kingdoms had a lot more in common than they did apart. For one thing, they all had Germanic roots, which gave them a sense of common identity. Secondly, they all inherited Roman institutions and traditions to varying degrees. And thirdly, they were all Christian. By the end of the 5th century, Christianity had spread from Rome to most of Western Europe, where it became the dominant religion. In fact, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, soon became the spiritual leader of the entire region, rivaling even the authority of the Eastern Roman Emperor. But although these kingdoms shared many similarities, they also differed in significant ways. The most obvious difference was their relationship to Rome. The Visigoths, for example, initially allied with the Western Roman emperors to fight against other Germanic peoples. Once they settled in Gaul, they adopted its institutions and culture and became the closest thing to Rome's legitimate heirs. In contrast, the Franks never quite accepted Roman rule and instead focused on expanding their own power across northern Europe. So now that Rome is gone, who inherits its legacy? Over the course of the 6th century, a few different Germanic kingdoms rose to prominence as the heirs of Rome. First was the Burgundian kingdom, known for its art and culture. Next was the Visigothic kingdom, notable for its legal code. Then the Lombard kingdom shone with its early Italian Renaissance. But none were as influential as the Frankish kingdom, which eventually evolved into the Carolingian Empire under the rule of Charlemagne. Charlemagne wasn't the first great king of the Franks. That honor goes to Clovis, who united the various Frankish tribes under his rule and expanded the kingdom into northern Italy and western Germany. His successors continued to push the boundaries of the Frankish world, establishing it as the dominant power in Western Europe. By the mid-700s, the empire stretched from the North Sea to the North African coast. This vast territory contained a variety of people, including the Franks, along with Saxons, Bavarians, Lombards, Frisians, Alemanni and others. Although they had different origins, cultures and languages, they were united under one king. Although he ruled over so many different peoples, Charlemagne's most important legacy was the creation of a Carolingian Renaissance, a period of cultural renewal that laid the foundation for the High Middle Ages. It was a time when Latin literature flourished and classical texts were rediscovered and copied. The Carolingian Renaissance set the stage for the intellectual and cultural achievements of the High Middle Ages. Unfortunately for Charlemagne, his empire didn't last long. After his death in 814, the empire split into 3 different kingdoms. Western Francia eventually became France, while Central Francia evolved into the Holy Roman Empire. Eastern Francia merged with the Kingdom of Italy to become the Kingdom of the East Franks, or the German Kingdom. These three kingdoms would spend the next few centuries fighting each other for supremacy. Meanwhile, in the Iberian Peninsula, the Visigoths enjoyed a golden age under the rule of King Alfonso VI. During his reign, the Visigoths defeated the Muslims, recaptured much of their former territory, and established themselves as the dominant power in the region. Following the collapse of the Carolingian Empire, the various kingdoms of Europe grew in power and influence. The Frankish kings continued to expand their territory, eventually conquering much of modern-day France and Germany. The German kingdom became a major player in European politics, frequently at war with the French. Meanwhile, the English kingdoms of Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria dominated Britain. As these kingdoms grew, so did the power of the nobles. Once loyal vassals of the kings, they now commanded private armies and often rebelled against royal authority. In response, kings throughout Europe granted their nobles hereditary titles and estates in exchange for military service. This created a rigid social hierarchy that lasted for centuries. In spite of the rise of feudalism, life in medieval Europe was not without its opportunities. For those willing to work hard, it was possible to advance in society and achieve wealth and power. Towns and cities grew, trade expanded, and new technologies developed. The growth of towns and cities was particularly significant. As people moved from the countryside to urban centers, they created new markets for goods and services. This led to the growth of a merchant class and the development of new industries. At the same time, technological innovations made life easier and more productive. The heavy plow allowed farmers to cultivate land more efficiently, while new watermills and windmills made it easier to process grain. These innovations helped to increase agricultural productivity and support a growing population. Despite this growth, medieval Europe remained deeply religious. The Catholic Church was a powerful force in people's lives, providing not only spiritual guidance, but also education and charity. Monasteries and cathedrals were centers of learning and culture, and monks and priests played an important role in preserving classical texts. As Europe grew, so did the power of the Church. During the High Middle Ages, the Church's influence reached new heights. It became a major landowner, controlling vast estates that produced agricultural goods and provided for the needs of the poor. Popes and bishops gained considerable wealth and power, and monasteries and cathedrals became centers of political and economic activity. This growth was due in part to the efforts of popes like Gregory VII, who worked to reform the Church and assert its authority. He also launched the Gregorian Reform, a series of measures aimed at reforming the Church and purifying its clergy. But the Church's growing power did not go unchallenged. In the 11th century, a group of French monks known as the Cluniacs accused church leaders of simony and absenteeism. Simony was the practice of selling church offices, and absenteeism meant that many high-ranking church officials were not actually living in their assigned territories. This criticism was part of a larger movement known as the investiture controversy, a conflict between the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor over the right to appoint bishops. These conflicts reflected the growing tensions within medieval Europe and foreshadowed the challenges that lay ahead. As medieval Europe entered its final centuries, it faced a series of dramatic changes that would have a profound impact on its future. One of the most significant was the growth of trade and commerce. As towns and cities grew, so did the need for goods and services. This led to the growth of a merchant class and the development of new industries. Another significant change was the growth of population. The Black Death, a devastating plague that swept through Europe in the 14th century, killed millions of people and had a profound impact on European society. It led to labor shortages, economic disruption, and a decline in population. However, as the population eventually recovered, it also created new opportunities for advancement. These changes were accompanied by significant developments in warfare and the state. As monarchs consolidated their power, they developed more sophisticated military forces and institutions. England and France, for example, developed professional standing armies. And the 100 Years' War between England and France, 1337 to 1453, marked a turning point in military history with the emergence of new weapons and tactics. Meanwhile, the growth of trade and commerce led to the development of new financial instruments and institutions. Banking and credit became more sophisticated, and new forms of currency and accounting emerged. Despite these changes, medieval Europe continued to be shaped by religion. The Church remained a powerful force, but it faced new challenges during the Renaissance and the Reformation. Humanism, a new intellectual movement that emphasized the study of classical texts and the importance of human reason, challenged traditional religious views. And the Reformation, led by figures like Martin Luther, called for a reform of the Church and a rejection of papal authority. These developments would have a profound impact on the course of European history, setting the stage for the rise of modern Europe. And that brings us to the end of part 1 of this series. As we look back on the early Middle Ages, it's clear that it was a time of significant change and upheaval. The fall of the Western Roman Empire, the rise of new kingdoms, and the growth of feudalism transformed European society. The growth of towns and cities, the expansion of trade, and the consolidation of monarchical power also laid the foundation for the High Middle Ages. But as we move into part 2 of this series, we'll see how new challenges and changes emerged, shaping medieval Europe on a path to the modern world. Stay tuned for the next episode and let me know what questions you have about medieval Europe. And remember, keep an eye out for the key terms and concepts because they're going to be super important as we move forward. Until then, take care.